What happened to me shouldn't happen to anyone, but I'm glad it did. On the surface, the construction site on the outskirts of town was just another bustling hub of activity, where hardened men moved mountains of concrete while wielding shovels like swords. But beneath that grit lay a hierarchy that felt more like a caste system. And I, Andre Jefferson, a seasoned black bricklayer, had never felt more invisible. Enter Richard Harrington, the recent Stanford grad, radiating arrogance as though it were cologne. With his shiny credentials, he treated me like I was less than a tool in his belt. During a morning meeting, he ridiculed my recommendations with a wave of his hand, backing it up with sarcasm that echoed through the room like his hollow education. For a moment, silence hung thick around us, eyes darting between me and Richard, gauging how much of this public humiliation they could tolerate. I held my breath and maintained my composure. I wouldn't let him see my anger. But the day unfurled, I prepared for the unexpected. My custom two-piece suit felt foreign against the backdrop of hard hats and work boots. When the owner finally arrived, Thomas Jefferson, my younger brother, known for his keen eye for fairness, Richard's arrogance withered under a gaze laden with the burden of his own mistakes. In a stunning revelation, I exposed Richard's disrespect and presented evidence of his safety violations. One choice loomed before him: embarrassment or redemption. Days later, in a public announcement, I watched as he exited, burdened by accountability, a lesson preached to a company that needed it badly. 6 months later, Richard stood on the same site, not as a superior, but as an instructor for young, disadvantaged workers. In helping them redefine their own worth, he came to understand mine. What once felt like a painful scar had transformed into a badge of honor. The construction site now thrived on respect and equality, a legacy I'd never foreseen but wholeheartedly embraced. "Can we get back to real engineering here?" Richard Harrington sneered, leaning back in his chair like a king surveying his court. "Andre, you may have laid bricks for 20 years, but that doesn't mean you understand structural integrity." Silence washed, punctuated only by the muffled sounds of heavy machinery outside. Andre Jefferson's jaw tightened, but he held his ground. "I'm not trying to undermine your designs, Richard. I'm merely pointing out that the load-bearing capacity isn't adequate." Richard rolled his eyes, the corners of his mouth curled in disdain. "See, this is exactly what I mean. You bricklayers think you know everything about buildings, but without a Stanford degree, we're hardly in the same league." Forbidden of the younger crew members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Andre's composed demeanor betrayed none of the anger boiling within. "It's not about degrees, Richard. It's about experience and what keeps this site safe." "Experience, huh?" Richard barked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Last time I checked, experience doesn't come with a fancy title." Andre took a deep breath. "Maybe you should check again. Experience is what builds trust, and trust is something you seem to lack." Richard's smirk faltered momentarily. He glanced at the clock as anxiety creased his brow. The owner was due any minute. Unbeknownst to him, Andre had transformed into his alter ego, Thomas Jefferson, ready to reveal the truth. When the door swung open, the room stilled. "Good morning, team. I'm Thomas Jefferson," he announced, and Richard's arrogant facade shattered. "Wah, you're not serious," Richard stammered, his bravado giving way to desperation as Andre laid bare the evidence of safety violations and unprofessional behavior. As Richard stood paralyzed, Andre felt a sense of justice surge through him. "I'm not just a bricklayer," he said firmly. "I represent every worker you belittled today." The crew erupted in whispers, the air thick with a shared realization of their own worth. The construction site buzzed with the sounds of hammers and machinery, yet the atmosphere felt stifling for Andre Jefferson. As a seasoned bricklayer, he had dedicated 2 decades to his craft, only to find himself belittled by the brash new chief engineer, Richard Harrington. Armed with his Stanford degree, Richard assumed a posture of superiority he often displayed through sarcastic jabs and dismissive tones. "Bricklaying isn't rocket science, Andre. Maybe leave the heavy lifting to the professionals," Richard sneered at a recent meeting. Laughter rippled around the table, a mix of discomfort and approval evident in the crew's eyes. Andre felt the sting but maintained his composure, refusing to give Richard the satisfaction of a reaction. Behind his steady gaze, frustration simmered, each insult layering on years of unacknowledged worth. The tension peaked with the announcement of an emergency meeting. The site owner, Thomas Jefferson, was coming. Richard's confidence waned, his earlier bravado faltering as he prepared to face his superior. Meanwhile, Andre took a deep breath, donning his professional attire, a symbolic shedding of his understated role. He gathered critical documents, one for each instance of disrespect he endured. When Thomas arrived, the air thickened. He was not just a visitor, he was Andre's brother. Realization washed over Richard, his face paling as Thomas stepped forward, ready to expose the morning's events. What happened here today was not just a failure in leadership, Thomas began, his voice calm but firm. It was a reminder of the systemic disrespect woven into this company that we must address. In that moment, the energy shifted. Andre stood tall, a quiet resolve radiating from him, his humiliation transforming into a potent power. The confrontation lay at the cusp of change, both personal and organizational. But what would happen next remained unspoken. A storm swirling beneath the surface, waiting to erupt. The air was thick with dust and tension at the construction site as Andre adjusted his tool belt, feeling the weight of Richard's earlier humiliation still lingering. "Just because you've got a degree doesn't mean you know a damn thing about building," he murmured under his breath, the quiet defiance bubbling within. It was a small victory. He'd refused to let Richard's words define his worth. As the crew gathered for the emergency meeting, Andre exuded a calm confidence. He wore his freshly pressed shirt like armor, a subtle but powerful statement against the arrogance of the chief engineer. "I'll need your attention today, everyone," he announced, raising his voice just enough to capture their focus. This time, he spoke not from the shadows, but as a seasoned professional deserving of respect. Richard, nervous and sweating under the pressure of Thomas's impending arrival, shot him a dismissive glance. "What do you think you can prove?" he sneered. Instead of responding with anger, Andre met his gaze steadily. "You'll see," he replied softly, his voice steady as a foundation being laid. When Thomas entered the room, the atmosphere shifted instantly. "Let's talk about respect in this workplace," he announced, turning to Richard. Andre stood beside him, the quiet strength of his presence bolstering Thomas's words. As revelations unfolded, Andre felt a surge of clarity. Each detail laid bare was a brick in a new foundation, hinting at a resurgence for both himself and his fellow workers. "Accountability begins today," Thomas declared, and as the room erupted in murmurs, Andre felt a growing sense of purpose. He had quietly reclaimed control, ready to build a path forward, one founded on dignity and collaboration. The sun blazed down on the construction site, sweat glistening on the backs of laborers who maneuvered heavy blocks. In the center stood Andre Jefferson, seasoned and steady, his hands disciplined from 2 decades of crafting bricks into sturdy walls. Across the site, Richard Harrington, the new chief engineer, looked down on the laborers from his perch, a smug grin plastered on his face, ready to flex his shiny degree for all to see. "Now I know some of you prefer using your hands over your heads," he scoffed, interrupting Andre during a morning meeting. Murmurs exchanged among the crew, eyes darting, trying to gauge the mood. Andre met Richard's condescending gaze with calm defiance. He would not give Richard the satisfaction of seeing him flinch. As the hours passed, tension mounted when an impending visit from the owner sent panic through Richard, his bravado beginning to slip. Little did he know, Andre had prepared meticulously. When the owner arrived, dressed sharply in a tailored suit, Richard's composure splintered. "Everyone, meet Thomas Jefferson," Andre announced, voice steady, revealing the identity he had concealed. Confusion spread through the crew as Richard fumbled for words, his confidence evaporating. You weren't supposed to be here," Richard stammered, color draining from his face. The air thickened as Thomas detailed the morning's humiliation, exposing Richard's condescending remarks, picking apart the threads of his authority. "This is a workplace, not a stage for your misplaced superiority." With the safety violations laid bare and witness testimonies corroborated, Richard glanced around, desperation replacing arrogance. "I didn't mean..." Barber didn't let him finish. "You have a choice, Harrington. You can step down from this position, or we can find a better way for you to learn respect." As the crew erupted in applause, silently cheering for justice served, Richard stood inches from the abyss of embarrassment and consequence. The weight of the moment pressed upon him, while Andre remained composed, a silent triumph radiating from his steady gaze. Months later, Richard returned to the site, not as the chief engineer but as a volunteer, bearing the humility forged from his downfall. Meanwhile, Andre looked on, witnessing the palpable change in the workplace, the subtle shift in respect and understanding, woven into the very fabric of Horizon construction. As I look back on that day, I feel a mix of pride and reflection. The tension in the air before Thomas Jefferson arrived was almost palpable, a turning point that changed the dynamics, not just of our team, but perhaps for Richard too. I had faced humiliation from someone who thought credentials could overshadow experience, but in that moment, I stood firm, knowing my worth. Watching Richard's bravado crumble in front of the very team he sought to belittle was a bittersweet victory. It's more than just about revenge. It's about creating an environment where every voice is valued, regardless of title or background. Now, I've seen Richard transform into someone who listens and learns, proving that change is possible if we allow space for it. Do you think I went too far in how I handled things? What would you have done in my shoes? Have you ever had someone treat you like that in your own life? I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. Let's talk about the complexities of power and respect in the workplace. Your stories matter, and together we can foster understanding and empathy.